The Story of Mankind by Hendrik van Loon. Publisher's Introduction. Thank you for picking up a copy of The Story of Mankind by Hendrik van Loon. We have updated this work into modern English, so you can understand exactly what Van Loon wrote over 100 years ago. We encourage you to refer to the original writing as you listen to this updated work. If you enjoy this book, please share with a friend, leave a positive review on Amazon, and see more updated works at oldbooknew.com. The Story of Mankind, way up in the north, in a place called Svithjod. There's a huge rock. It's 100 miles tall and 100 miles wide. Every 1,000 years, a small bird comes to this rock to sharpen its beak. When the rock has been worn down like this, then just one day of eternity will have passed. Chapter 1. Setting the Stage. We live with a huge question mark hanging over us. Who are we? Where do we come from? Where are we headed? Slowly, but with steady determination, we've been moving this question mark further and further towards that faraway line, beyond the horizon where we hope to find our answer. We haven't gone very far. We still don't know much, but we've gotten to a point where we can make pretty good guesses about a lot of things. In this chapter, I will explain how, based on our best understanding, the conditions were prepared for the first appearance of humans. If we imagine a long line showing how long animal life has been possible on Earth, then a much shorter line below it shows how long humans, or human-like creatures, have been around on this planet. Humans were the last to appear, but the first to use their brains to control the forces of nature. That's why we're going to study humans instead of cats, dogs, horses, or any other animals, even though they all have their own interesting histories. At first, the planet we live on was, as far as we know, a big ball of burning stuff, like a small cloud of smoke in the vast space. Over millions of years, the surface cooled down and got covered with a thin layer of rocks. Rain fell heavily on these lifeless rocks, breaking down the hard granite and washing the dust into the valleys hidden between the tall cliffs of the steaming earth. Finally, the time came when the sun shone through the clouds and saw how this small planet was dotted with a few tiny puddles. These puddles would eventually grow into the huge oceans of the eastern and western parts of the world. Then one day, an amazing thing happened. Something that had been lifeless suddenly created life. The first living cell floated on the sea's water. For millions of years, it floated aimlessly with the currents. But during all that time, it was developing certain habits to survive more easily on the harsh earth. Some of these cells were happiest in the dark depths of lakes and pools. They settled in the muddy sediments that had washed down from the hilltops and became plants. Others preferred to move around, so they grew strange, jointed legs like scorpions, and began to crawl along the bottom of the sea among the plants and pale green things that looked like jellyfish. Still others, covered with scales, used a swimming motion to move from place to place in search of food, and gradually they filled the ocean with countless fish. Meanwhile, the plants had grown in number and needed to find new places to live. There wasn't enough space for them at the bottom of the sea anymore, so they reluctantly left the water and settled in the marshes and mud banks at the base of the mountains. Twice a day, the ocean tides covered them with salty water. The rest of the time, the plants did their best to survive in the thin air around the planet's surface. After many centuries, they learned how to live just as comfortably in the air as they did in the water. They grew bigger, becoming shrubs and trees, and eventually learned to grow beautiful flowers. These flowers caught the attention of busy bumblebees and birds, who spread the seeds far and wide until the entire earth was covered with green fields or shaded by big trees. Some fish also started to leave the sea and learned how to breathe with lungs as well as gills. We call these creatures amphibious, meaning they can live equally well on land and in water. The first frog you see can tell you all about the joys of living both on land and in water. Once out of the water, these animals slowly got used to living on land. Some turned into reptiles, animals that crawl like lizards, and they shared the quiet forest with insects. To move faster on the soft ground, they developed better legs and grew larger until the world was filled with huge creatures, known in biology books as Ichthyosaurus, Megalosaurus, and Brontosaurus. that grew to be 30 to 40 feet long and could have played with elephants like a big cat plays with her kittens. Some of the reptiles in this family started living in the tops of trees, which were often over 100 feet tall back then. They didn't need their legs for walking anymore, but they did need to move quickly from branch to branch. So they turned part of their skin into a kind of parachute that stretched between the sides of their bodies and the small toes of their front feet. Over time, they covered this skin parachute with feathers, turned their tails into steering tools, and flew from tree to tree, eventually becoming real birds. Then something strange happened. All the huge reptiles died out quickly. We don't know why. Maybe it was because of a sudden change in the weather. Maybe they got so big that they couldn't swim, walk, or crawl anymore, and they starved even though they could see the big ferns and trees but couldn't reach them. Whatever the reason, the million-year-old reign of the big reptiles was finished. The world started to be filled with very different creatures. These were the descendants of reptiles, but they were quite different because they fed their young with milk from the mother's breasts. That's why modern science calls these animals mammals. They no longer had fish scales and they didn't have bird feathers, but they covered their bodies with hair. Mammals also developed other habits that gave them a big advantage over other animals. The females carried their young inside their bodies until they were ready to be born, while other creatures left their babies exposed to dangers like cold, heat, and wild animals. Mammals kept their young with them for a long time, protecting them while they were still too weak to defend themselves. This way, young mammals had a much better chance to survive because they learned many things from their mothers. You might know this if you've ever seen a cat teaching her kittens how to take care of themselves, wash their faces, and catch mice. I don't need to tell you much about these mammals because you already know them well. They are all around you. They are your everyday companions in the streets and in your home, and you can see some of your less familiar relatives behind the bars at the zoo. Now we reach a turning point where humans break away from the endless cycle of just living and dying like other creatures. They start using their intelligence to shape the future of their species. One type of mammal stood out because it was really good at finding food and shelter. It learned to use its front feet to grab things, and with lots of practice, it developed something like a hand. After many tries, it figured out how to stand up on its back legs. This is a tricky thing to do, and every child has to learn it again, even though humans have been doing it for over 1 million years. This creature, part ape and part monkey, but better than both, became the best hunter and could survive in any climate. For more safety, it usually traveled in groups. It learned to make strange sounds to warn its young ones of danger coming. And after